a number of difficulties in school, so greatly appreciate it. Can I welcome Jonathan Price as an observer? Mark Sutton has sent his apologies. Tim, do you want to pick up on observer,
I just want to just ask Forum for permission. One of the things that we've got is we've got Alan Harding is here as an observer, as a secondary maintained head teacher, and just checking with Forum that it's okay that we allow Alan to contribute during the discussions. He wouldn't have a vote, but he would be able to contribute during the discussions, if that's okay with everybody.
Good. No objections? Fabulous. Mandy, if we could just do the declarations of interest. Has anybody got any declarations of interest?
Hi, Chair. I'm Tim Hopkins. I'm substituting for Philip Siddell, representing PVI. I know it's only an item to note, but one of the free schools which is named, I am a trustee of the Multi Academy Trust that has been awarded that free school. So it was just to be transparent about that. Thank you, Tim.
Great. Okay, so that moves on to item 3, which is the membership update report.
I'm sorry, Chair. We seem to have missed the apologies. Can we just go back one, please?
I'm sorry, Mandy. What apologies have we got, Mandy, please?
We've received apologies from Jenny Westley, who is in a lecture and can't get out of that commitment. Jane Rutherford, who has some school issues that she can't leave. Anne Tapp, who has staffing shortages. Abigail Rourke, who has staffing shortages. Kim Albert, who has a school emergency. Philip Siddle, who is on holiday but has sent Tim Hopkins as his substitute, and Karen Dobson, who is at a Department of Education meeting.
Okay, thank you, Mandy.
Thank you.
And being as you did that so well, back to you for the membership update report, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. This is it's a regular update report. As you know, we went through a round of elections back in April, May time. There were a number of vacancies. We have a number of new members and also returners. I've highlighted the new members or the returners in yellow on the report, just so that you can see who's new. There is still one vacancy. It's the secondary academies. We have we have had 3 rounds of elections and still vacant. I did send out an email to all members of the forum before the meeting, so if there is anybody that that you know would like to stand. I think Steve knows of someone.
Steve, do you want to?
Yes, I was just unmuting myself. Yes, I did send in response to Mandy's email, Emily Vero, who was Kidsgrove and I think now interim CEO of the Three Spires Trust. Had shown an interest before, and I had a discussion with her several months ago. Actually, she wasn't actually eligible then, but as her school is now converted as an academy, she is eligible and she's still interested.
Are there any other nominations? Are the forum okay to approve that nomination then, please?
Yeah, I think that's appropriate, Mandy. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the end of my report. Thank you.
Okay, any questions from the floor around the membership? Great. Thank you, Mandy. Okay, if we can move on to item 4, please, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of March. I'm not going to do matters arising, but what I will do, has anybody got anything in the minutes that they would like to bring to the attention of the group. Okay, Steve, thank you.
I didn't want to disappoint you, Richard, by staying silent at this point. So yes, I've got there are three things I'd just like to bring up briefly. I don't think any of them will take any much time. On
faith in you, Steve, every faith.
on page 1 or page 3, depending on which pagination you look at, but it's the opening page of the minutes. Item 26, towards the bottom, it says there was concern that the change in school census date, this is pupil premium, from October, January would affect the pupil premium for some schools by up to £1,300. Could I just, and I raised that, could I just clarify two things? Well, clarify one thing and update one thing. That is per pupil who was not included in the census because of the change of date. You know, it just says would affect some schools by up to 1,300. It was actually per pupil who was missed. And the updated figure is actually 1,345.
Steve Brenton?
Can I
Okay.
move on?
Yeah, sorry, Steve, I think you froze. Yeah, do you want to, Mandy, could we make an amendment to the minutes, please? Steve, have you got your second point?
Yeah, second point is on top of page 3 or 5. As you know, Judy Wyman and I represent local authority consultative committees on Schools Forum, and they have asked me to pass on at the very top of that page. It says where a member has, this was amendments to the Constitution, where a member has not attended 3 consecutive meetings, the members of the consultative committee would request that be kept under review, because their view is it should actually be 2 strikes and you're out rather than 3 strikes as you're out. Clearly it's in place now. I'm just passing on the request from the consultative committees that be kept under review with a view to possibly amending it in due course to 2 consecutive meetings rather than 3.
Okay, Steve, thank you. And your final point?
Final point, and it is a matter arising in a sense, and I can't see anywhere obvious where it would come up on the agenda. It's page 5 or page 7, 3rd paragraph down, or the beginning of the second new paragraph. Staffordshire will be providing a response to the DFE consultation about the proposals for a small number of changes to the national funding formula, and I just wanted to highlight the fact that this week, possibly last week, there was a much wider DFE consultation on the national funding formula, which is going to be quite significant, and which is open, unusually for the DFE, not just over the 6 weeks of the summer holiday, but it's actually open from early July till the end of September. And this may be something that the LA has already got in mind, but I would request that consultation is highlighted in whatever is most appropriate way, perhaps through the school bag, that is highlighted to head teachers and school business managers and chairs of governors, probably. Perhaps might be helpful if the authority, as well as highlighting it to those people, could provide a short overview of it, and possibly even some guidance of the local authority's stance. I mean, I'm taking it as read that the LA will be responding to the consultation. So that's me done for the time being. Thanks, Steve. Just pick up on that. Tim, can that come the action? I know Anthony's not here today.
Yeah, I'll pick it up with finance colleagues. I think Will may be on the call, so we'll have heard that, and we'll pick it up with finance colleagues. As you're right, Steve, that the local authority will be providing a response to it, and then we'll look at what the request there and what we can do.
Yes,
Okay.
we have picked it up, and we are starting to look at the consultation.
Thanks, Will. Can we also make sure, Tim, that it goes in other communications, the bag or whatever other way?
Yeah, that's what I say. We'll have a conversation with Will and finance to understand, because I think Steve's point is probably valid in the sense of not necessarily saying to respond in the same way, but understand the response from the local authority as a steer to that consultation, I think is what the point you were making, Steve.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping for. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Tim, there's somebody else's hand up, but I can't see, unfortunately.
So it's Les.
Thank you, Les.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On page 7, I've got a query about the minute on halfway down page 7. When we talked last time about independent schools, and a paragraph talks about evaluation done in the same way as any other educational provision. I don't know what that means. Can someone explain what that is?
Tim, can you?
So I think that's that reference to reviewing what the annual review is saying about the progress that youngsters making in that setting.
But in terms of how the LA monitors all schools, I assume there are difference for maintained academies, special and so on. Is it the same process? I'm thinking about outcomes here, academic, social, well, all those kind of development issues that the special schools have to deal with, which is different kind of data, different assessments. Is the LA involved in thoroughly analysing those and seeing whether the money's being spent well or not?
I wouldn't say in terms of that thorough analysis of the school, Les, no, but in terms of the outcomes that are being recommended from a review, then those outcomes are reviewed. So at an individual level, clearly one of the things that we would always take is to ensure that youngsters are attending those settings that are from an Ofsted inspection perspective, where there are some concerns from an Ofsted inspection, then we would again review those placements. But for all other youngsters, it would be done through the annual review process.
I know it's expensive for people to visit these places. I appreciate that. But it's just, I was thinking, as it's costing so much money, would it be wise to have some kind of allocation of someone just to monitor on a rolling programme the impact? Because otherwise we don't know whether all this excess spending is draining everything else. It wouldn't be so bad if the impact's fantastic, would it? It's not going to be so good if the impact's not positive. So I'm just thinking about, well.
Yeah. I take the point, Les, and I see what you're saying. In terms of that kind of evaluation of all schools, to some extent, would be done through the annual review process or an Ofsted inspection. So in terms of the local authority, when it's asking a youngster to attend a particular school or naming a particular school in the youngster's EHCP and the school that they're attending, I guess it would be exactly the same for all of those schools, irrespective of whether they're state funded or independent. One of the things that we have introduced, I guess more recently, is around regular attendance checks, so that we've now got a computer attendance report for those youngsters who are attending those independent settings, so that we do require them to tell us when those youngsters are attending and what their attendance is like, and that's part of the contract that we establish with each of those independent settings. As I say, annual reviews as part of the county council's procurement regulations, that we only agree a placement for a youngster for a maximum of one key stage anyway. So again, it's reviewed at the end of each key stage as well.
I think it might be something worthwhile that we consider, Tim, putting on the recovery group's work programme to look at how the quality assurance processes that are taking place in the independent sector, in terms of value for money. it might be something just to examine if we are trying to reduce that spend hemorrhaging out of the of Staffordshire into the independent sector. So that might be a consideration. Thank you, Les.
Thank you.
Anybody else with any items from the minutes? Alison?
It was just to pick up on the point that Les has talked about, and it's certainly something that the special head teachers have volunteered their services to the local authority for, to help with the QA process. I don't think we've had that offer taken up yet by the local authority, but the offer is there to support with it. And I think perhaps one of the other things that ought to go to the recovery group are the figures of the students who go into independent provision, but then who are exited out of independent provision into local authority provision if places become available, and there's equally appropriate provision in the maintained sector.
Okay, thank you, Alison. Okay, before we move on, anybody else got anything with the minutes, any items, any questions? Is everybody happy that I sign those minutes off as being reflective of the meeting? Great, thank you. Item 5, decisions taken by the chairman under delegated powers. I'm not aware that I've taken any decisions under delegated powers. And leading into item 6, notices of concern and licence deficit agreements. Melanie, could you pick that up, please?
Yeah, of course, no problem. Good afternoon. The notice of concerns paper is actually pretty nice reading this time, given the year schools have had. We've actually withdrawn 2 notices of concern. They were actually issued to schools with budgetary deficits, and they've ended 2021 actually in surplus. So we've withdrawn those for Greenhall Nursery and St Peter's Cab as well. We've not had to issue any other notice of concern since last forum, and that includes following on from the budget setting process. So as a result of the BNF submitted by schools, no new notice of concern. 2 schools actually finished 2021 in a deficit position. 1 already had a notice of concern, 1 was on our radar, so no surprises there. So like I say, I think given the year we had, it's quite good news stories coming out there. Point 6 is a change to the monitoring arrangements for what Entrust do on behalf of the County Council. Historically, Entrust have monitored the individual school budget, so the ISB. We've never really looked at nurseries as part of this. It's part of the arrangement that we have with County Council. We have noticed a couple of nurseries where there's a deficit being carried on a 92 or 96 code, or there are substantial deficits sat on those nurseries. We've contacted the DFE, and what they've actually said is where a nursery and a maintained school have a single registration, then those 2 budgets should offset each other. So going forward, we will be monitoring the nurseries.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Any questions for Melanie from the floor? No? Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 7, the Growth Fund. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Each year we report the allocation of growth funding to schools, which is made in accordance with DFE guidance and this forum's own growth fund criteria. Page 2 of the report notes the allocations that have been made to 10 schools, and page 3 confirms the expenditure totalling £441,000 and an underspend against the budget of £1.5 million, which is contributed back to DSG balances. Thank you.
Is that it, Andrew?
It's provided for information, so unless there's any comments.
Steve, I think you might have a question.
Yeah, sorry, Richard, I've got 3 again. Taking them in order on the paper. I wonder, Andrew, and I apologise for not flagging this up with you in advance, but I wonder if you could just explain briefly or remind us of the difference between the free school presumption and the waive process, because I note with pleasure on the appendix that the wave ones, the Rugeley Power Station, the Branton Locks one, aren't going to saddle the local authority with any setup or new opening costs. Could you just remind us of why they're in that wave programme, which doesn't cost us anything, as opposed to the respirator presumption ones, which do cost us?
Thanks, Steve. There are two routes for establishing new free schools to meet basic need in an area. One is the presumption route, which is a local authority-led process. And the second one is the wave route, which is led by the Department for Education. So the differences are, in terms of the presumption, the local authority will identify the need for a new school, will issue a specification and invite interest from approved trusts to effectively apply to open the school. And then there's a process a little akin to a recruitment process, where the local authority will shortlist academy trusts and make a recommendation to the Department for Education for a final decision by the Secretary of State. So that route is started by the local authority, and the costs of the buildings and any revenue costs pre and post opening are funded by the local authority, and they're covered in this growth fund report. The alternative route is where an academy trust applies to the Department for Education to open a new school. These are often done in waves, which is basically a wave is a time period in which academy trusts can notify the department of their wish to open free schools. That process, as I say, is led by the Department for Education, and therefore the building costs, or the majority of building costs, I can qualify that in a second, and the pre and post opening costs are covered by the Department for Education. And the qualification in terms of building costs are that as part of our statutory duties, we will engage with housing developers, and where there's an impact of housing on local school provision, we will seek Section 106 contributions towards the provision of additional school places. And therefore, in those circumstances where there's Section 106 contributions for the school that have been approved by the department, we contribute that towards the total cost.
Thank Andrea, that's very helpful. So where it's local authority led and it's free school presumption, then that clearly responds to the LA's perception that there's a need for it, but that if it's a wave and the application comes from the MAP, that is not necessarily going to be the case. Is that?
I think in the past, probably 10 years ago, when free schools were opening in very many places where it was perhaps inappropriate, and a number of them were closing down, the department are clear that whenever they consider a free school wave application, they would take the views of the local authority, and they would focus on areas that have either got issues in terms of quality of provision, but also basic need or a shortage of capacity. So it's inbuilt now into the DFE processes.
Okay, thank you.
Second question.
Well, I'll put the other two. I'll probably put the other two together because they're fairly brief. The first one of the two is at the bottom of that page, item 5. It's talking about reducing administrative burdens during COVID-19 and not asking schools to submit financial self-declaration. So there's a simple question there as to whether it is the intention to go back to asking for financial self-declaration as and when things settle down. And then the final point, which is also a very simple factual one, is and this links in with an next agenda item really, but the underspend of over 1.5. Am I right in thinking, and you might want to pick this up under the next item, am I right in thinking that that is not taken into account in the next paper, where it says that DSG reserve is 2 million in deficit? So two questions there with, I think, simple answers.
Right. I'll defer to my finance colleagues in terms of the question about the overspend. In terms of the self-declaration, at the forum last year, we forum agreed that we wouldn't seek, the chair agreed that we wouldn't seek these self-declarations from schools because of the, as it says, the administrative burden of COVID. Now we're still in that, we're still experiencing all those burdens, albeit they're different burdens, and therefore we felt it right not to seek that from schools. But the growth fund criteria and the process that has been agreed by Forum is that we do seek that information. So that would be a decision for Forum as to whether in future years they stop the requirement of schools to fill in information on the last 3 years of income, expenditure, and the financial pressures they're under, or whether to maintain it. I have to say, in the years where we have shared it, I think it's been fairly academic, the information. So I would question the value of it. It may be members that have been on Forum for a little while might have a better idea, but I'm not sure whether longer term how much it adds to the process.
Okay, thank you.
Could we defer the overspend questions to Will? Will, could you pick that overspend question up that Steve has asked, please?
Yes, no problem. The overspend, well, that's an underspend for 1.5 million underspend, which for Growth Fund refers to is referring to budget year 21-22. But similarly, there was a underspend for Growth Fund in 2021, and in the table on the next agenda item on the outturn on schools budgets, you'll see that within the central and de-delegated items that there's a underspend against that budget, and that basically represents the underspend in for Growth Funds.
So, yeah, I mean, my question was at the very bottom of that table, where it says DSG reserve.
Yeah.
2 million in deficit. It is 2 million in deficit. It's not 0.5 million because we've got a current.
No, it's 2 million in deficit. So if you look at that table, you've got the opening position, which is for surplus of 400,000, and then the use of reserves, which is 2.4 million. That 2.4 million is basically the overspend on all GSG areas. So you've got the high needs overspend, which is a 5.9, which is offset against an underspend in early years and Growth Fund, essentially, which takes you to the overall overspend of 2.4.
Right, that's what I thought. I just wanted confirmation though. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions for Andrew around the Growth Fund? No, thank you, Andrew. Moving on to item 8, which is the school's budget final outturn. Anthony was initially going to pick this up, but I understand that you are, Tim.
Yeah, unfortunately, Anthony Humphreys sends his apologies. He has an appointment that he's unable to move. So I'll be picking up the next 2 items that Anthony would have normally picked up about. So in terms of the final outturn, as I say, it's the outturn position for 2020-2021. And as you can see there, it's an overall overspend of 2.4 million against the initial budget of 316 million. And so the variance there is 0.7%. And that is entirely as a result of the overspend in the high needs block. And as Will has just mentioned, circa £6 million. And again, as we've just been talking there, that's offset in part by savings in the central and the delegated budgets of £2.8 million being surplus from the Growth Fund. And again, as we agreed at Schools Forum last year, then that can be part of the deficit recovery plan. And then there was an underspend in the early years block of 800,000. And again, this is being charged against the DSG reserve, which has now gone into that deficit of the £2 million. So it is a deficit of £2 million, as I say, as Will has just indicated there. And as we all know, I suppose that is a down from a surplus of £8 million that we had just 4 years ago. I suppose whilst we're not alone in this position, it's a position that we know is unsatisfactory and does represent that serious financial risk to the local authority. And we'll come on to it in the next report. Further recovery action will be required to reduce the overspend and the growing deficit. So we'll be working up proposals with the recovery group. And again, we'll be bringing those back to Schools Forum in due course. But I think at this point in time, just to put on the table, that will likely include a proposal 5% from the schools block next year if the government guidance that normally is published in August allows that. Just moving on in the report, just to say that, this is just a reminder to Schools Forum. This only represents those local authority maintained schools in terms of the school reserves. And so at the end of the financial year 2020-2021, the schools reserves were 22 or just over £22 million, £22.1 million. And if we compare like with like, so between 1920 and then 2020-2021, then that is an increase of £6.6 million from that previous year. I think we've already heard from Mel in terms of the licence deficits. What I would say is there continues to be a number of licence deficits, and currently the information is that we have 12 schools with those licence deficits, and that is a value of £1.4 million in terms of deficits there. What we would say is that whilst that continues to be a concern, it is a considerable improvement from the position in 1920 when that overall value of those licence deficits was £2.4 million. So licence deficits is reduced by £1 million as well. You done in terms of the outturn? I don't know whether the...
Okay, thank you, Tim. Thank you for standing in for Anthony at the last minute. Have we any questions from the floor to Tim around the outturn?
I have, Tim, if that's okay. It's Tim Hopkins here. At point 4, it talks about the underspend in the early years services. Because 600,000 has been redistributed as contingency payments to settings, was the underspend actually 1.4 million, or is that taken out of the 800,000, leaving 200,000 left?
No, so that is, so yes, so the contingency is 600,000, and that is put to one side. We've lost my screen. Hopefully we're back on. I've lost my screen then for a minute. It's all right. We're on a joint screen, and I've lost connection. So I'll carry on talking, and then I'll make sure it's back up, Richard.
Right. Okay.
Yes. So the 600,000 is the contingency. The 800,000 is to do with based on the actual number of youngsters attending provision. And so that's where that funding is an underspend. So that's why it's an underspend. It's not part of the contingency, or the contingency is not part of that, Tim.
Would it be right to assume that money will be rolled over into the service, or is that money will that go into the deficit recovery plan?
So that does, yeah, that will go into the DSG reserves, and so that, well, it won't be part of the recovery plan. What happens is it goes into the DSG reserves, and so from that perspective, what happens is it will then naturally respond to the overall position within the DSG, and so it will contribute to the deficit. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Steve?
Yeah, yes, it's just going back a while, not immediately pre-COVID, but perhaps 3 years. We, as an appendix to this item every year, one of the appendices, we always used to have the breakdown school by school of final outturn figures, which I'm sure are there in the public domain somewhere. But particularly in terms of what you were just saying, Tim, about balances and the amount in balances, it's actually quite interesting information. And I wondered whether that was something that had just dropped off the radar, or whether it was a deliberate decision not to share that with Forum as an appendix.
Sorry, Steve, we were just getting every screens back on, so I'll just repeat what I think you asked. So what you're asking is, previously we would have shared the maintained schools balances as an appendix to the outturn report, and we haven't now. I think, and you're asking why we don't do it. I think that part of the reason we don't do it is because that's only presenting, I guess, part of the picture in Staffordshire. And so whilst we will be sharing with Schools Forum 128 schools balances, what we don't share is the other 254. And I guess it's about that kind of equality, really, that we're not doing the same with academies. And that was why we took the decision that we wouldn't share them. They're available. I mean, if it's a decision that Schools Forum wants us to share those balances, then we will. But that was the reason we took not to share individual balances.
But the overall figure that we've been talking about of school balances and reserves, they only apply to the maintained schools, don't they?
They do, yeah, but they do, yeah. But that's only the figure that we've got, and that was the point I did make, if you remember, right at the very beginning when I said that this is just that representation of the maintained schools, not the picture across the county. Yeah,
the point I've made many times before at these meetings is that overall total of school balances is also only part of the picture. So
yeah.
I mean, it just occurred to me, and I checked back that my memory was correct, that those figures used to be shared, and I just wanted to ask the question whether it was policy, and you've explained that it is.
Do members feel that appendix would be useful to have that individual breakdown? Judy? I think you might be muted, Judy, sorry.
Sorry, being late to the meeting, I'm not pressing the right buttons at the right time. This information is extremely helpful to us in other contexts when we're having other discussions with schools. So I would be pleased to see it back in our information.
Okay, thank you, Judy. From a head teacher's perspective, is there anybody else who feels strongly that this information would be useful? No hands up. Oh, sorry, Tim, there's a hand, but unfortunately I can't.
I think that's Vicky.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi, Richard. Would it be helpful to know how many maintained schools there are left? Would that help to make the decision? Because I'm just thinking the more that they diminish, and in my head, I'm working on the assumption that any schools that are contributing to that, the reserves, would the people that need to know in terms of any action that needed to be taken around that will already know. The less maintained schools there are, perhaps the more flagging up there would be. I suppose we get the names of anyone that's on the radar anyway, don't we? But I'm just, for me, it's enough to know, for example, there's this many maintained schools left, and of that number of schools, these are the amount of reserves held, because then if the number of maintained schools reduces and the reserve stays the same, that would be useful to know. I think it's only relevant if you know how many schools we're talking about.
So
Personally.
Yeah. Thanks, Vicky. That's based on the 140, just over 140 maintained schools. So we've got 254 academies. So basically, it's 2/3 academies, 1/3 maintained schools left in Staffordshire in terms of the breakdown. And as I say, that's a like for like. When I gave those figures, those were a like for like comparison. So that where we got conversions, those schools have been taken out of that comparison.
I think as a head teacher on Schools Forum, that's enough to know, but I accept that obviously other areas that Judy might link in with, that information might be helpful. So I think it is different depending on what your role is, really.
And I suppose that this is a report for Schools Forum is my response to that, not for other functions.
Okay, so are we in agreement that appendix will not be provided? The Schools Forum saying they don't need that appendix, or are we saying that we would prefer that appendix?
I'm saying we prefer the appendix.
I was hoping we weren't going to get to a vote, but if that's how we're going to conclude this. So let's keep it nice and simple. Those people who feel that the appendix would be useful, if you could just put your thumbs up, that would be good. Okay, and those people who feel that it wouldn't be of any added value, put your thumbs up.
I'm not sure, Chair, but
Yeah.
where you can see more.
And those people who aren't bothered, put your thumbs up. Yeah, I think overall it seems to be that Schools Forum feel that wouldn't be about any added value. Whether Steve and Judy would want to have a conversation with you, Tim, outside this meeting for that information, then that would probably be a good idea. Okay, so have we any other questions around the final outturn? Okay, thank you, Tim, but you have not escaped because you are on item 9, the high needs block.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as previously we've agreed that this is a regular report now outlining the latest position on the high needs block, and particularly because we're given the ongoing pressures that we recognise. So again, not going to go through the paper in full, but I suppose to summarise the outlines from it, the forecast of the overspend of the high needs block for 21-22 is currently at £7.5 million, and that's despite the increased government funding this year. And I suppose what we would say with that is that increased funding is keeping pace with the increasing cost and demand for the SEND support across the county. What it hasn't done is close the gap that was there originally, because one of the things I think that we're all aware of, that in terms of the high needs block over the last number of years, it's been somewhere around the £6 million overspend year on year. And so whilst the government increase is really appreciated and required to keep us in line with the increasing costs and demand, what it hasn't done is it didn't close the original gap. As we know, it is a national concern. Government do recognise the problem, and I suppose what I would see that it is encouraging, because government are seeing it as a particular issue and are providing additional resources, both through the revenue and the capital funds. But one of the things that we will continue to do is to lobby for more funding, and you will see through the F40 group and the County Council network that we will be lobbying in that way. I suppose the report, again, just linking back into the outturn, that significant decline in the DSG reserves, and so it means that the overall DSG now is in deficit by £2 million, and this year, given the current forecast, is going to go into a further deficit. As I say, we've mentioned in the kind of the outturn report, significant financial risk to the local authority, and we know that we're doing work around the SEND district inclusion model, but we know that that is a long-term model in terms of providing support early so that youngsters don't escalate through the system, and we recognise that that's going to take time, and so therefore we know that we're going to have to look at that deficit recovery plan. And we'll need to think in terms of strengthening that to manage the immediate pressure. What I will say is that certainly the information that we're having back from government is that, yes, they've increased the funding in this area. They recognise that it's still a particular challenge across the nation. And so as part of the SEND review, they've indicated that this will be an item within the spending review that will take place later in the autumn term. But what we don't know yet is what the impact of that will be. But we are told that it will form part of that spending review in the autumn term. I guess just in terms of the other points just to make there is the working group. Yes, we've had a working group looking at this, and I suppose, Richard, you can feed back some of that, but in terms of the ability to take decisions within that working group are limited, given the fact that 95% of the funding we're now spending out of the high needs block is actually linked to individual youngsters, and so some of those decisions are more strategic decisions that need to be taken outside schools forum. However, what we do know, and we recognise and certainly working with that group, is that they do have a role in monitoring the spend and also thinking around the recovery plan, and that's where we want to take the working group next. Just reference in the high needs block update again around the education banding tool, and I know Leslie is sharing that information widely, and that continues to progress well and is on course within the planned time frame. What again I will say here is the education banding tool is not a way of cutting funding. It's about a way of reallocating funding more fairly and equitably. And so I guess some of the most recent activities is they've completed the banding tool assessments of 600 youngsters, and we're currently working on the proposals for a financial model and band configuration. And I know Leslie shared that information in a number of forums, including our head teacher network meetings and with the strategic group and the reference group. Again, they've taken a survey to understand that benefits and realisation plan, and that as we expected, the survey confirmed that education providers' views of the current mechanism for green top-up funding isn't particularly fair and equitable. And so what we will intend to do, though, is the survey will be completed 12 months' time once we've implemented the education banding tool, again, to get a view around, is the funding being distributed more equitable? And then just that reference back to education banding tool for everybody. It's on the local offer and the link is provided in the report. And as we've already said previously, it's a phased go live date from the 1st of February 2022. And so that will be for those youngsters with an education health and care plan, that there is a new one after February 2022. They will be part of this, and similarly, where there are significant amendments, they would be part of this as well.
Okay, Tim. before I throw it out to the floor, just a couple of comments, having been on that working group, that I think might be useful for members. Tim did provide an update of what the working group had looked at. I think that was emailed out yesterday, Tim.
I'm not sure it's gone to all members yet, Richard. So,
right, okay, well, if you could make that an action, just to, I was just keen as being part of that working group. I don't like being part of groups that don't have any impact. And it isn't a group that has any decision-making powers. It's more of an advisory group, a group that can look at the spend. But I think if you could just spend a few minutes reading that note, it might be useful. It does give context. It does give context that it is a national issue. So yeah, and I think the recovery group will be set in very much the same pattern as it was a couple of years ago, Tim, I believe.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I think it would be really useful, having been part of the reference group and the steering group for the education banding toolkit that Leslie Calverley is leading upon, whether she could have time at forum to spend a few minutes updating us on that, so we could have it from the horse's mouth. I think that would be really useful. I think Leslie's doing a fabulous job and has a lot of knowledge around special school funding. So I think that might be useful, Tim, for her to come on for 5 minutes.
Yeah, okay, we'll speak to Leslie and look at it.
Okay, Andrew, your hand's up. If I've missed you before, I do apologise.
No, just waiting patiently, Richard. Thank you. It's a really simple question, Tim, if it's okay. The accumulated deficits within the F40 survey on the second appendix, they're quite interesting. I suppose it's whether we can pick out any relative statistical neighbours within that group to get some view of where we sit. And I take, you know, we all know it's a national problem. We're supposed to be heading for a national funding formula. It's just whether we can pick out anything that's a bit more comparable in that list. If it's not, that's completely understandable. It's just really for a bit of clarity.
So, and I'd have to go back and look at them all, Richard, Andrew, just to say that yes, we do have stat neighbours, but our statistical neighbours are not always the same in terms of that kind of the makeup. So two that are very closely kind of linked, I understand is reported to us, is Nottinghamshire and Lancashire.
Okay.
And one of the things that we are arranging is a discussion with Nottinghamshire to understand how they kind of are dealing with the particular challenges that they're faced with as well.
Yeah, it's not going to be a good picture anyway. It's just whether there was anything else that might have been of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Steve?
Yeah, just a question, Tim. The DFE sent out, I think, beginning of this week, the high needs provision allocation, which is obviously not the total pot. I just wondered whether there was anything significant for Staffordshire in that, either good or bad, that we weren't expecting.
I haven't had a financial update from Ant about it, so I'm assuming that it's what we would have expected to see. But if there is anything different in that, we'll get back to people.
Okay, I'm sorry to have sprung it on you, but I was preparing late for this meeting. Otherwise, I would have asked you before.
Thank you, Steve. Alison?
Can I ask Tim whether there's been any steps taken to try to ameliorate the high needs block debt with extra surplus from the health? I'm thinking particularly here about the fact that now special schools have got to use their staff to accompany students who are having physiotherapy. And this means that the costs to the education sector are going to carry on increasing because we are increasingly doing more and more of what I consider to be the health needs for the students.
Yeah, so in terms of, again, Alison, and thanks for sharing that with us earlier on. And it was raised with our kind of joint commissioning colleague to understand the impact of that. And again, having those discussions around the impact on education funding as a result of a health action. So we will continue to pursue that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Okay, have we any more questions for Tim around the high needs block? Or are we letting him escape? Okay, thank you, Tim. Thank you for standing in there on behalf of Anthony. That brings us to item 10, which is the work programme. Mandy, do you want to comment on the work programme?
Just to say really that it's a regular report. Your next meeting's the 14th of October, unless there are any questions.
Are there any questions around the works programme? Okay, thank you. Just one thing I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about, and I don't know whether this is the appropriate time or not, but in terms of the medium of virtual meetings and the effect that might have on the way that we meet a schools forum, just for people to be thinking around that. Maybe it's not the right time now, but for, do we need 3 face-to-face meetings a year? And if we probably need at least 1, which would be the best one, obviously, with the ones that the most decisions are made in. But if we think we can just have that minuted to be thought about at a later stage, I think that would be really useful.
Yeah, thank you. And just to say that the regulations have changed. So in terms of schools forum, the regulations did say pre-COVID that these meetings had to be held in public and had to be public meetings. The COVID arrangements is that they could be virtual meetings and webcast, as we are webcasting this afternoon. Those regulations have been updated now to allow these kind of meetings to take place virtually. If I was, again, I know it's for people to think about, but if I was kind of thinking about it, Richard, my view would be the October forum potentially being a face-to-face, and then the other forums, which is the other 3, potentially would be either virtual or hybrid, because I think we would have the ability to operate a hybrid model as well. But again, just for people to consider.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I've just put it on the radar. I think it would be really useful. Okay, there are no questions around the works programme. That moves us back to you, Mandy, for item 11, which is the appointment of chair.
Thank you, Chair. Due to the changes to the Constitution at the last meeting, I'd like to ask you to make nominations for the appointment of chair. It's for a 2-year period. Are there any nominations? I think I can see Kim Prince.
Hi, Amanda. Yes, I'd like to nominate Richard, please.
Is that seconded by anyone, please?
Alison Parr would have seconded, but I think she's just had to leave at 3 o'clock.
Yeah, I'm happy to second that.
Okay. Are there any other nominations? No? Okay. In that case, as long as Richard is happy to accept that.
Okay, yes,
be appointed. Yep.
Thank you, Kim.
And the next item is the appointment of vice chair. Are there any nominations for vice chair, please?
I'll nominate Steve Barr, please, Mandy. Judy Wyman here.
Is that seconded, please?
It has been seconded by Jane Rutherford in the past.
It's Julie Roach. I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Steve, are you happy to accept the position?
Yes, thank you, colleagues.
That's great, thank you. Back to you, Chair, to close the meeting.
Okay, Mandy. So there is no part 2, I presume, of the meeting.
No, Chair.
Thank you. So as I led into the meeting, just to thank everybody for giving their time up this afternoon. I know we're all busy at the end of term, and I know a lot of schools have got a lot of difficulties. Certainly from my point of view, I hope that your summer plans reach fruition and you get some opportunity for some downtime and to spend some time with your family and those that are dearest to you. So once again, thank you very much, and we'll see you all in September, October.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And could I echo that as well on behalf of the local authority to everybody? So we again want to thank you for everything that you've done. Wish you a safe and peaceful, I guess, break over the summer.
Thanks, everybody.